Just start by sort of what you feel like you've done in the legislature that was particularly focused on jobs, either in the House or the Senate. And you can tell us the pieces that you feel most strongly represent that for you.
Well, I certainly believe that the key to economic development and jobs starts first and foremost with education. And so in my first term, this was a minor accomplishment in terms of the big picture, but it was a major accomplishment for my district, and that was when Governor Baldacci was mandating school consolidation. I came from a district where we have a really high-performing school and incredibly efficient administration, and so it didn't make sense at all for us to consolidate with South Portland. It would have actually increased the costs and possibly decreased the educational output and performance. So I was able, as a first-term legislator, to amend the state budget to provide for an exception for high-performing and efficient school districts. So there's a handful, I think there's 10, I can't recall specifically the number. There's like 10 or 13 districts around the state that if they could show that they were high-performing, in other words, the kids were getting educated and that they weren't using a bulk of taxpayer money in unnecessary administration, they wouldn't have to go through the process of consolidating. So that was good. But clearly the highlight of my legislative experience in terms of job creation was I sponsored legislation that led to the Broadband Strategy Council, which then led to the granting of stimulus grant gave rise to the three-ring binder project, which then I sponsored legislation to kind of create this dark fiber entity that enabled this new project, 1,100 miles of fiber optic cable, to be attached to telephone poles, which expands broadband significantly in rural Maine and connects Maine to the global economy. And then after that, my long-term plan was to, and continues to be, but it's a little bit different now, the vision was to, if we had this build-out of infrastructure of high-speed internet around the state, then we could attract a green data mill. I'll stop if you want to ask more questions, or should I keep going?
No,
okay.
The
vision. So the vision was to have the infrastructure in place that would enable Maine to attract a Google or an Intel or one of these big high-tech companies that needs a place to house all their servers, because now all this computing is done in the cloud. And this would lead to not only jobs, but refurbishing of mills, using renewable energy, as well as creating high-level, good-paying jobs that would then spur economic growth in this tech sector. So that was the vision, and I feel like I made it pretty far. I mean, we had this strategy council, which was bipartisan, which led to unanimous recommendations for certain projects. The three-ring binder project is often given great attention, but there was other significant success with the libraries. They got a stimulus grant. A couple of other stimulus grants were given to Washington County in particular that led to projects. So the Strategy Council itself was a model that I think was good success, and people around the country used it to get at the stimulus money that was available in the Obama stimulus bill. So it was great. And the three-ring binder project, as you probably know, it was recognized by the United States Chamber of Commerce as being the #1 business infrastructure in the country, and has gotten, recognized by a number of organizations and companies, and so it's been a success, and it was a bipartisan success, and it was about jobs, and so it's funny. Well, so I'll end there.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. So it sounds like to you it started with the council, which was in the first half of the 124th. Then you had three-ring binder, and then you had this longer-term vision for green data centers, and those were sort of related.
Yes. And I forget exactly what the broadband thing was just fascinating to me. The expansion of broadband and the need for broadband. And then I was invited to go to this meeting down at Dartmouth College, and it was a snowy day, and I drove to Dartmouth College, and there was all these universities there talking about how they could get some of the stimulus money available to enhance their research capacity and networks. And this slide went up on the wall. Jeff Letourneau from the university was supposed to have attended that meeting, but his car like spun out in the snow and he couldn't make it. So he was there on the speakerphone. I had never met him. And this slide went on the projector, projected on the wall of these rings demonstrating how valuable a network like this could be to, it showed the proximity to Halifax, which then goes over to Europe, and it showed the ability to like connect to the Massachusetts technology corridor, as well as branch out to like Dartmouth and some of the research facilities. And I was just like, wow, that's brilliant. Like, we have to do that. And I just made it my mission, like, okay, so just gave me something to do in the legislature. It's like, you just have to kind of get something to do, or otherwise you're just useless. So.
Sure. So this was in the winter of 2008 then,
Let's
before
see.
the summer where they had the stakeholder meetings and various things.
Yes.
Just 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And who invited you to the meeting at Dartmouth? How did you sort of talk a little bit about when you first got involved with internet issues? It certainly seems like you have this track record of, like you said, these 3 different bills that you sponsored. How did you first sort of get really interested in internet?
I don't know. It seems like I should know the answer to that question, but I think because I think I was at a couple of conferences that just talked about economic development and economic development specifically for rural states, and I was just fascinated by the opportunities that the internet presents to small businesses, women-owned businesses, rural businesses, just things that I really care about. And I think it was Phil Lindley at the Connect Maine Authority is the person who said that there was this meeting. He was really helpful and just really spent a lot of time talking to me about because we have the Connect Maine Authority. So that's where I went first to find out, like, what do we do here in Maine to, to provide high-speed internet access to rural communities. And he kind of really took the time, was very patient, and gave me a lot of information. And ultimately, I think it was him who told me about this meeting that I went to. And then, so that was the beginning.
And then it just sort of took off from there. And so do you remember any work from that first meeting at Dartmouth leading up to the summer? Because I know that's when they started to have these stakeholder meetings for all the various parties for the Three and Binder, how are we going to get that money to Maine? Did you do any work from that first meeting at Dartmouth through the summer?
I did. Oh, it's funny. I had a huge file on all this stuff, and I've been slowly just getting rid of stuff. But I did a ton of work.
Talk a little bit about
Well,
that.
I just educated myself as much. It was there was a representative in the legislature, Bob. He's the former radio announcer. I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me, but. He basically told me, I was frustrated because I felt like I was spinning my wheels a little bit, not feeling like I was contributing at the legislature, because unless you're in the leadership or a chair, you don't. And he basically said, just find something and become the expert on it. And that's what I did. I became an expert on broadband. I learned as much as I could about it. I went to as many meetings and conferences as I could. I made attempts at communicating with the people in Senator Snow's office and Senator Collins' office who dealt with these issues. I spent a lot of time at the Connect Maine Authority. I talked to business owners like Fletcher Kittredge at GWI, was somebody who I met with and gave me ideas. I just did a lot of research. I pulled the statute about the stimulus, the actual bill, and then the accompanying regulations, and found what other states were doing, made relationships with some of the people who attended that Dartmouth meeting. There was a guy over in New Hampshire who was trying to build out a community-based broadband, and then sponsored the bill.
So you were involved already from your role in the Broadband Strategy Council. And that's how you sort of got that. That's what sort of paved the road for you to get involved in the environment.
Well, I saw that there was this stimulus money available, and I wanted to get some of it. And so the idea was, if there was a strategy council who could kind of identify projects and support kind of organize the state around how the state can best maximize its opportunities to get some of the stimulus money for broadband. And so it made sense that there would be some sort of legislation that would pull together the stakeholders, that would make sure it wasn't one-sided or the other, that it couldn't be criticized as being partisan, like really try to bring everybody to the table who might be interested either for or against, and have a process. And so process was really important because there was competing interests. You know, Fairpoint did not want the three-ring binder to get stimulus money because they saw it as a threat. And so we had that. The Telephone Association of Maine was active in the group protecting the interests of their members. So there wasn't just, you know, an echo chamber of yeah, yeah, yeah. It was like we tried to bring everybody who could possibly offer something and work something out. And I thought it was a great process. And then the council itself was made up of like Vendine, Vafiatis from the PUC, the Connect Maine Authority, the Governor's Office, the Department of Economic and Community Development, TAM. I believe we invited the industry people as well. So we tried to make it as open as possible, and had a ranking process. The Telephone Association of Maine. So they're kind of the the established telephone companies that are a little bit threatened by the new technology coming aboard that might take away some of their money and their customers.
And they and Fairpoint were the main ones who throughout, were sort of opposed to having this come, at least in what they thought.
Initially, yes. And then
can you talk about how you sort of worked to get those, parties involved and on board? More importantly, I know in the end there were a couple of amendments to the bill, but how did you sort of, what was your role in getting everybody to sort of be on the same page?
Well, I was the chair. I was the House chair, and the Senate chair was Larry Bliss, but he wasn't active as much at all. So it was me chairing the meetings, and what I did specifically was just try to be as open and accountable to everybody, but at the same time being really straight with where what my long-term goal was, which was we want the best projects available to be recommended by this group to then go down to Washington and get money, so that try to give everybody an equal opportunity and have the projects judged on the merits as opposed to judged by the political connections or some of the other things that sometimes play into it. And we just had a series of meetings. I think that the Strategy Council itself was really good at, for the most part, some of the legislators didn't show up, but the key people like the Connect Maine Authority people and the technology officer from the Governor's Office, the PUC, did a lot of work, and we, I think, tried to be as open as possible, give ample notice of all the meetings, and keep everybody in the loop, give everyone an opportunity to express themselves. But ultimately, it came down to, we recommended that both the Fairpoint application as well as the three-ring binder application be recommended by the governor, and then the governor had to make recommendations down to Washington, and then they were kind of on their own.
You mentioned the, sort of long-term goal of having it be open access. I think that's what you use. I know that's a big part of the three-ring binder is that, now that you have this sort of the carrier's carrier, the dark fiber provider, you can then lease it out to companies. At what point, I guess, in the process that you're aware of, did that sort of idea become so central to the project, that idea of open access, and that you're going to sell it for a flat rate? Was that sort of from the start? And this is in the summer of 09 now, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, the ideas about open access and non-discriminatory rates was something that was intrinsic to the underlying stimulus bill, as well as the Broadband USA plan. Those are ideas and concepts that really resonate with me. This notion that people would have, this is infrastructure that everybody has a shot at. So if the small entrepreneur up in Washington County has equal opportunity to make a go of his or her business as anyone else. It's not a question of who has more clout or necessarily more power or money at the get-go. Everybody can get internet for the same price. And that seems to me, that in a nutshell is what I think government is all about. Like, that is the essence of what I believe American democracy is all about, is that we collectively pool our resources and that everybody should have an equal opportunity to make a go of it. And so that was nothing that I thought of, but I certainly bought into it. I mean, that was, you know, you can't get the stimulus money unless you guarantee that there's equal open access.
Right. And you know, one of the amendments, I can show it to you here, so you can jog your memory, that I don't think, at least here, you were in favor of. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that. This was the amendment that essentially established the sustainability fee.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, sort of, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, I think this speaks to what you said earlier, you know, getting everybody on the same page was important in this, the whole process of making it happen. But I'm sort of just curious from you, you know, why you were against the sustainability fee. This is the fee that is $3 per mile to start, then drops to $2, and then sunsets in 2017. And you were one of a few, I mean, you certainly weren't the only one.
No.
One of the few parties who were not in favor of this. Is something you talk a little bit about why you weren't.
Yeah, it's my, I haven't looked at this for a while, so
Sure,
I'm not totally remembering all the details. But this was, just to kind of, this was like, in my view, like a payoff. This was a way to get Fairpoint out of the way. It was basically a transfer of money to somebody who was opposing it, and it just felt to me like it was not in the best interests of taxpayers, that we should not be using this money that's supposed to be for economic development to simply, you know, pay off the incumbent to get out of the way. But at the same time, I get that there is compromise and a need to resolve issues. But it seemed like this was against the grain of the idea that we were going to use this stimulus money to provide infrastructure that was going to be available on equal basis and, you know, non-discriminatory. So that was, you know, just, it didn't make sense to me that we were going to essentially give additional incentives to incumbents who already benefit significantly from government subsidy by way of the, you know, every time you pay your bill, you have to pay that little bit of money that goes to.
Essentially, it's a pool that's set up, and companies like Fairpoint and others can then reapply to have that money if they invest it in other projects that sort of are within that vein of extending access to underserved or unserved areas
Right.
of the state. And that's sort of it's sort of just you're putting money in, and then if you take the effort to apply for it again, you can get it back eventually.
Well, and in my recollection, again, I'm not as sharp on some of the details of these amendments because there was a lot of paperwork involved with this, but my recollection was that this was something that was, it was going to give a little bit of an advantage to people, the incumbents that already had an advantage, as well as, you know, kind of divert some of this money that should be going to leveling the playing field and expanding infrastructure to just paying off somebody to get out of the way so we can move forward.
Is it possible for you to tell us how many jobs and what type of jobs were created by this piece of legislation?
I don't have, that's a really good question, and I'm interested in knowing as well, but I don't have the actual numbers of jobs. I know that construction crews are building out the three-ring binder project, and that Maine Fiber Company itself has employed people. And for instance, I was up in Washington County talking to Susan Corbett at Axiom Technologies, and she showed me how the three-ring binder sort of connects into their company, and she described some of the jobs that were created in Washington County as a result. So there are jobs that were created. I don't have the exact number.
Do you have any estimate, or could you give us any guidance where we might get an estimate?
I think that if you asked Josh, the president of Maine Fiber, he could give you some numbers as well. I think Susan Corbett at Axiom Technology would be able to give you some numbers, and Jeff Letourneau at the university is somebody who's really, he's brilliant, and he is very connected with the project and probably would be able to help you. He's a number cruncher, and he would probably have some numbers. And Phil Lindley at the Connect Maine Authority.
Yeah.
I mean, that's clearly something that, I mean, that's a number I should be, right? It should be on all my campaign literature, but I don't have the exact number.
Right, because you say the first sentence in your opening page of your web page says you have worked to create quality jobs. So
well, I know that it's, and that's true. I mean, I can tell you that I know for a fact that there have been a number of jobs. I just don't know the number. If I had to guess, I would say probably the construction jobs would range between 50 and 100, but those are obviously not going to be permanent jobs. And then I would say that in terms of the expansions at GWI and at Maine Fiber and at Axiom would maybe be somewhere in the range of 25 jobs. But then, of course, the domino effect is what businesses that now are taking advantage of the three-ring binder project and expanding their services have created. And I just don't, I mean, I don't have the resources to actually do that, hopefully.
Has any of that happened yet? Is enough of the line built out that ripple effect has occurred yet, Cynthia?
I believe, yes. Like, for instance, this is a little bit different, but in Washington County, where the three-ring binder goes in, they not only have access to the infrastructure, but they also got some grant money to provide farms and fishermen with technology that has increased their efficiency significantly, which ultimately leads to them making more money. And what I mean by that is these, do you already know all this? Should I continue?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so like blueberry,
we've done some research, we don't know
yeah,
anything yet.
blueberry growers and fishermen in Washington County would have to go every single day, fill out forms for the government, and they'd have to, by hand, fill out the name of their boat, the license, every single day, the same forms. So what the stimulus money did was provide them with a laptop as well as a program and training so that these same fishermen and farmers can have a system of doing electronically what they had been doing manually, which not only saves them incredible amounts of time, but gives them the capacity to actually, chart their productivity, and has dramatically changed the lives of people in Washington County, according to Susan Corbett. So she'd be a great person to talk to.
It's good to have a name.
And then they also, what they've done is they have, they're using Washington County Mobile Broadband Public Safety Pilot Project they're hoping to launch, which would be really, they're working hard on it and hopefully it'll work. And what that would be is the EMTs would have technology on their ambulances and on their person, so that if they come to an accident scene, whereas now it's so remote that the distance between an accident scene and a hospital sometimes is a matter of difference of life and death. So they'd have the ability to have a camera and have a doctor in an emergency room actually viewing the person and be able to take the vital signs and so actually care for this person remotely because of the technology made available through the infrastructure itself, but then also add-ons to the infrastructure. So it's pretty exciting stuff. I mean, and there's farms now that are able to market their products, around the world. There's an amazing opportunity there for Maine to, like I said, to connect to the global economy and allow people who want the quality of life to telecommute, blah, blah, blah.
Well, what would you think it would be a fair time to assess the effectiveness in terms of job creation of the three-ring binder?
I think at every step, I think even though construction jobs are temporary, for a family, a temporary job is a good thing. And so I think that you could look at it from, at every step and calculate the number of jobs and now is a fair time.
Yeah.
And I think, I think, and the federal government has incredible reporting requirements. Unfortunately, when the Republicans took over in the legislature, I was sort of cut off from this. They didn't want me to do any more. I was not ever invited. I wasn't invited to do the they have now a broadband advisory panel or something, and they didn't want me on it. So they've essentially just cut me off. So I'm not close to the information as much as I used to be. Hi. But I do know that the federal government, as a requirement of getting the stimulus money, has really strict reporting. And so the number of jobs is probably somewhere in the documents that get reported to
the feds by the state.
By the state and by the Maine Fiber.
By Maine
Yeah.
Fiber, probably to the state, then to the feds, or you think directly to the feds?
I bet it probably goes to the feds, although I'd imagine the state.
Copy to DECD or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
but that's interesting. I mean, one of the things that the folks have told me, and I've talked to a lot of them about, a lot of folks who've studied it, and what they tend to say is that the project seems like it's going in the right direction, but that they haven't been able to put sort of a hard pulse on it. I'm waiting from the folks at Maine Fiber right now. I wish I had them information already for you today.
Yeah.
But I'm waiting for them to get back to you on that. But what folks have told me who've studied it is that this is sort of something that you can't judge now, and it's sort of more over a period of 5, 10, maybe decades to judge the sort of economic impact of it. And so I'm curious from you, sort of, it sounds like, I mean, you sort of touched on it earlier, but if you could just say sort of what you think the strength of the project has been in terms of already hard job creation, because it seems like a lot of it has sort of, small business X hiring a person, and upstate hasn't necessarily happened yet.
Right. Well, I mean, when I drove up to Aroostook County for the ribbon cutting, we passed trucks on the road that were attaching the 3-ring binder project to the poles. Now, the people on those trucks, whether they wouldn't be unemployed but for the project, I'm not sure, but there were people working, there was activity around, and when I talked to Susan Corbett, she said that, there are people being trained, nurses who are getting educated in Machias who would otherwise have to travel and couldn't because of childcare, are getting their nursing degrees because of the availability of this, infrastructure and training. But the bottom line is, I don't really know. I mean, I was heavily involved and would love to have all this information at my fingertips, but like I said, I was sort of cut out of the scene from, my green data bill was supported in committee, came close to having a stakeholder group. The Director of Economic and Community Development from Aroostook County supported it. Everybody supported it, but it didn't go anywhere. And I believe it didn't go anywhere because it was purely political, because I was running for state senate and they didn't want to have any success associated with me at the time. And so, unfortunately,
Yeah, no, I definitely want to get to green data just in a sec. But just to go back to 3-ring binder, would it be fair to say there's sort of a difference in job creation and job preservation, which maybe is these folks who, like you said, you saw on driving up to Aroostook, the people who work for the pole utility owners maybe getting more hours in the summer. So that's one thing that folks have told me. I mean, in your mind, is there a difference between job preservation and job creation with this?
Let's see, in my mind, it seems to me there definitely is a difference between job preservation and job creation. I'm not sure, though, that job preservation is relevant to the 3-ring binder project because it was brand new.
What I mean is Maine Fiber, for example, what they do, what they're doing now, to hang up the stuff as we're talking, is they subcontract to these pole utility owners.
Mm-hmm.
And so what folks have told me is that, judging the economic impact from creation is going to take a while, but right now what they've been able to look at and study is the preservation of existing jobs. So, the guy who works for the electric, utility provider can work maybe a 10 or 12-hour day in the summer and work a few more hours. And in that sense, that's what I mean by job preservation.
Yeah, then definitely, sure. I mean, there's job preservation and job creation, I'm sure. The question just is, I mean, this is infrastructure. I mean, I don't think there's any denying the fact that in this day and age, you can't have an economy, a diverse economy. You can't offer opportunities to people for jobs unless you have the infrastructure in place. So in my mind, I guess you could, I'm sure there are people who are going to say, oh, it didn't create any jobs or whatever. They're going to put a negative spin to it. But the bottom line is that we have high-speed internet access in places where there wasn't before. And if you don't think that internet access is important to job creation or the importance to developing businesses and giving people opportunities to access education, then, you know, I just disagree. You know, like it seems to me like you can't have a modern day economy that doesn't have modern day infrastructure, and that it's an appropriate role of government to use, you know, taxpayer money to build out infrastructure that can allow people to access markets, to access education, and to ultimately access jobs. I mean, so many people, like that's the other thing it's hard to quantify, is that so many jobs now you have to apply for online. Well, if you live in a community that doesn't have high-speed internet access, it's pretty difficult to apply for jobs. So I don't think you really can get so granular that you can identify there's 36.4 jobs in this town and 80, you know, but I think that knowing what we know, which is you need to have access to the internet in order to apply for a number of jobs. You need high-speed internet access to conduct business in many senses. You need high-speed internet access to conduct research and to be educated. And that this project provides high-speed access to the internet, then therefore it's going to have a positive result.
Yeah, no, and just to clarify, I mean, the folks who I talked to aren't putting a negative spin on this. It's just that essentially what they told me in the end game is that right now, as we are today, before the project obviously hasn't been completed yet, it's more about this preservation. And if you want to look at creation, it's going to take a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would you say that's fair to say that in the immediate short term here, it's been more of that, and then job creation? I haven't talked to anybody yet who said that the three-binder is bad and having this infrastructure is bad. But what I have heard is that it's hard to measure. You know, so you have a record of quality jobs. It's hard to measure those jobs now. Whereas you might need 5-10 years. I mean, would you say that's fair to say that it's about preservation to this point?
That's somebody else's characterization, and I guess I'm just not willing to just accept that because I don't know it to be a fact. I would say that while it may be hard to measure, it doesn't mean it's not measurable. And I'm not going to say that there have been no jobs created by the three-ring binder project, because I know for a fact that there have been. I just don't know how many. I mean, I know that there are more employees at Maine Fiber Company than there were before. I know that Axiom Technology has hired more people than they had before. I know that 3GWI is doing things that they didn't do before and have created jobs. I know that the people who are, you know, attaching dark fiber to the poles for 1,100 miles around the state of Maine are working because of the three-ring binder. You know, I know that in government, the bureaucracy itself has, you know, so, yeah.
No, yeah, I appreciate you clearing that up. If you want to, we can go to green data, and in your, I'll show you this too, in your testimony, because it's interesting, at the beginning we talked about sort of these three pieces that you felt like were your strongest points in economic development. When you, in your testimony for the three-ring binder, you talked about, you know, sort of, you know, the three-ring binder is about jobs and has the potential to turn some of Maine's 20th century infrastructure into the cyber infrastructure of the 21st century. And immediately, you know, you start talking about data computer centers at the heart of the modern economy. And it seemed like, at least from my reading of this, that you had this sort of long-term game plan that you talked about at the beginning.
What is this that you're showing me?
This is your written testimony for the three-ring binder bill. This is LD 1778.
So it's not written testimony. This is the legislative record from the legislature.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is what you submitted.
Not what I submitted. It's what I said on the floor.
Your oral testimony, then.
Right. Okay.
And so you said, you know, in there you sort of are immediately. It seemed to me like you had this like you said, this long-term game plan, and I wanted to get sort of a sense from you.
I can't even find my name.
Sure, here.
Oh, here it is.
Now we tried to improve the print out of that.
Yeah. Okay. Here, the chair recognizes the. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah. And I can point to the part that I'm talking about if you want.
No, let me just quickly skim it.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam.
Yeah. We were talking about that, a small typo, so I can seem to make the print to make it come in any better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like you know you had a long-term game plan in mind. So I'm just curious from you, sort of at what point I mean, this was obviously right before the bill was signed into law. But at what point in this process for you did the idea of getting a green data center, attracting one, sort of come into play?
I don't remember exactly, when it was, but, it's never just, we want to build infrastructure, we want to have a road system. It's like we want to have a road system because we need a road system that our economy can operate on. And so there was, I think, not only the need for infrastructure, but how we're going to use the infrastructure to create jobs and move Maine forward. And so the Green Data Center just seemed to me, I don't want to say no-brainer because it's used too often, but it was one of those, light bulb moments. Same thing when I saw the vision of the three-ring binder project on the wall in Dartmouth. I mean, that was somebody else's brilliance that led to that, but it just, in my mind, it was like, oh, it just clicked, like, oh, this is brilliant, like we have to do this. In the Green Data Center, it seemed like we have these mills that are shut down on these big rivers that, and a need for jobs, and we're going to have this infrastructure in place, and cloud computing is taking off. This is perfect. This is a great environment and conducive to this kind of expansion. And so
for you, and this was during while you were working on 1778 and getting that through, you already had these thoughts, it sounds like, in your mind about moving this forward.
Well, yeah, because when you start, my whole life was consumed by broadband and the potential of broadband and how it's going to help the economy, and trying to look at arguments from both sides and going to conferences. And the Progressive States Network is an organization that had specifically in place a group that we'd have telephone calls about how to use broadband. And I mean, there's various advocacy groups around the country that believe that broadband is the great equalizer and, sort of the way democracy can happen now. And so you can't help but pick up other ideas as you're going forward.
No, that's actually what I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Was that, I mean, Progressive States Network, I know you worked a little bit with them. Did you, do you remember, was there a point when you reached out to them, or did you go attend a conference or something? How did you first start your relationship with them?
Yeah, well, I think, I know, people at the State House, when I was sort of building my reputation as being the go-to person on broadband, said, do you ever participate in the Progressive States Network calls, because they have a broadband department or something. And that's when somehow I made the connection, and there was a woman who worked there at the time. Her name was Fabiola. She no longer works there, but she and I communicated on the phone, and she asked me to participate in some calls, and we developed a good relationship. And she did help me do some research on the green data mills and sent me information. There were some articles from various publications, as well as what some other states were doing. So that was a resource.
And so you started with that when somebody said, hey, have you heard of these guys? It's Progressive States Network. Maybe you should talk to them. And you reached out to Fabiola, or she reached out to you?
I don't remember. Yeah, okay. I don't. I kind of want to say that she reached out to me because I have a recollection of a phone call, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's sort of where I want to go next was, you said, in the testimony, you said at some point, that conversations are happening right now to make this happen. And I looked through the record on LD 192, which is the green data. It's a lot of back and forth between you and.
Oh well.
That happened.
Yeah.
Basically, just a lot of back and forth between you and John and Fabiola, who I wasn't able to get in touch with. But
yeah, she works at Planned Parenthood now, I think.
Oh, cool. But I'm just curious from you, sort of, what you thought and this is, I think these are the articles that you were referencing a second ago.
Okay, you guys are the most informed reporters I've ever talked to. Usually I have 5 seconds, and
take your time. No
That's
rush.
our hallmark, but again, we're not here to spring things on you.
This isn't a deposition.
No,
I'm feeling,
no,
yeah.
It feels like it doesn't. No, it's not here to spring things on you, gotcha on you, but we do.
You have a lot of stuff. So what do you want? You don't want me to read all these right now, or do you want me to?
No. This is just to jog your memory. Sort of,
okay.
I mean, this is what you were referencing a second ago, I believe, what upstate New York was doing, and the bill. This is LD 192 for green data, like you said, didn't go anywhere.
Yep.
And I'm curious from your perspective, sort of what the main stumbling block was. I mean, in some of the emails, it seemed like the cost of energy was a key issue. I don't know if that's if you would agree with that, or if you have some other.
I don't think it had anything to do with the cost of energy. I think the cost of energy in New England, in Maine, is, while it's high nationally, is the lowest in New England. I think it was unfortunately, just political. I mean, I think the new administration like kind of frowned upon doing any kind of study groups. You know, there was just sort of a ideology about it that study groups were a waste of time. And I think though that is it Ed Gervais, George, when he and I had a conversation up at the ribbon cutting for the 3-ring binder, he told me that he loves the idea of a green data mill, and that let's just do it on our own. We don't need a study group kind of thing. So I got the impression that it was, you know, just seen as, you know, kind of bureaucracy. Even though, while I may have agreed with him early on in my legislative career, my experience with the Broadband Strategy Council was that, no, it's actually important to have the beginning of, you know, the stamp of approval by the legislature to create a stakeholder group, and you have buy-in from all of the stakeholders is what's the foundation of a good process going forward. And so it was unfortunate that they nixed the green data mill, because I think it really could have led to something, just didn't happen. And there was the state Senate race too thrown in there. There's just no doubt about it that because this was a hotly contested race, and there was overtones of sort of a referendum on the LePage administration, because it was an election shortly after they had taken over, that there just wasn't going to be anything associated with my work in the legislature that was going to give me a boost in that election. Because I had a similar experience with my streamlined sales and use tax. I mean, a lot of work had gone into it. I had generally buy-in from the whole taxation committee. It's clearly a good idea. Since then, the LePage administration has come around and supported it. But at the time, it got nixed, killed.
So for you, it wasn't so much about the nuts and bolts of it, you know, the cost of energy or the subsidies that some folks like I think Fletcher and Matt Jacobson I thought, you know, it's going to cost a lot of money to bring this here. It was more about sort of the overarching political environment that it was in.
Because all those questions that were raised were things that could have been really aired out at a stakeholder group. I mean, it was a forum to actually get real facts as opposed to just, you know, speculation by various groups. I mean, some people think green data mills don't create any jobs. Others will suggest, like some of the articles that I've had with the bill, would suggest that no, it actually does. Green data mills do create jobs, and there's a ripple effect. So it seems to me that the stakeholder group would be a good way to have the debate and have the discussion, actually get the information, the research, and do it.
Can you say precisely who stood in your way?
Well, no, I would be speculating. I have a guess, but it's a guess.
No member of the Republican legislature or administration said to you, Representative Dill, no way you're going to get that? You never heard that said directly, or did you?
I pretty much heard that.
You pretty much heard it.
Yeah. I'm trying to recall. Well, Stacy Fitz was somebody who was supportive of the idea, and I think he pretty much came clean. But I feel uncomfortable because I don't know for sure. But I believe he said to me at some point, you know, it's not going to happen. You know, with a smile on his face, like you know, it's not going anywhere.
What you're saying is that you already had a couple of years in the legislature. Your experience told you that you could read between the lines. Yes,
definitely. And then when I saw George Gervais up in Aroostook County, you know, we had some laughs about it. I said, you know, so wouldn't this be a great place for a green data mill? Like, and he said, yeah, I love that idea. We don't need a study group. And I think we had some jokes about, you know, that.
And that's what you tried to do in the end, is that you had to try to have a resolve that would create this study group, but they turned it down. Do you know if the Economic and Community Development Department, have they done any follow-up on, you know, syntax? I know there's a letter sent to them saying, you know, from the chairs saying, you know, it would be nice if we could, you know, do some more research on this, continue it, report back to us the following year. Do you know if they ever followed up on that?
I have no idea. I tried to get on the group, you know, the new broadband group, but I wasn't allowed. So
this is the broadband.
It's the new one.
Strategy Council?
No, so the Broadband Strategy Council by its terms expired, but the legislation that created it had, you know, an expiration date, and then the LePage wasn't renewed. I was hoping that it would get renewed. But the LePage administration created their own, I think it's called the Broadband Task Force, but rather than have any legislators, they had just private industry people. So I had a conversation with, I think her name is Amanda Rector, in some office of the governor's, and I expressed an interest to be on, or at least be advised of the meetings, be kept in the loop, but that didn't happen.
Has that group got a chairperson?
I think there is a chairperson, it's like Brent, somebody, or there, I had the, yeah, they had the name, I had the name on my desk for a while, and I just yeah, so it's like, it's the governor's broadband task force, and Amanda Rector was the person, I believe, in the department who was, you know, staffing it, and there is a chair, and he is a broadband person in private industry who has a good reputation.
So to your knowledge, there hasn't, I mean, you don't know if there's been follow-up, but you've had conversations with folks who said, you know, we don't necessarily need this written down that we have to meet about it, but we're already making some progress. And have you heard any? The
only person who told me that was the, you know, Commissioner Gervais said that he supported the idea, that it did make sense, but he communicated to me that the governor's office didn't support my legislation because of the belief that the last thing we need is sort of another study. Again, I sense there was this ideological aversion to the process of having stakeholders and legislators around the table, that I think they just believe that if it's going to happen, it's going to be, you know, the private industry that's going to get it going, and with maybe some work from the governor's office.
And this process, which you already saw was successful in 3-binder.
Exactly, yeah.
And when you mentioned, you know, jobs, some people said it would create, green data center would create a lot of jobs, a little. And what was your feeling on potential job creation of this if it were to have?
Well, you know, I'm a lawyer by trade, and so I guess I didn't reach any conclusions. My assumption is that if you're going to refurbish an old mill and put a bunch of really expensive equipment in it, and it was going to be owned by a major software company, or that there would have to be some jobs associated with that, but whether the quantity of jobs was as high as some of the proponents said or as low as some of the opponents said, I just was kind of skeptical of both. I was kind of waiting for some information, and that's the kind of information that I think would come forward at a stakeholder group. You know, you'd actually have a chance to challenge some of the projections by both sides and try to get to a real number.
So in your estimation, this idea was thwarted before it could really develop fully?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yes. Not yeah.
You can say it if you want.
Yeah.
No, I think you said that earlier too. I mean, what folks have told me is, in terms of job creation, depends on the size, obviously. And you had some back and forth there with John Clark, I believe. And I don't know if it was him or if it was, I think it was Matt Jacobson, who said, you know, sure, it'll bring jobs. We're talking 15 to 20. You know, is that? I mean, was that the low end that you heard? I mean, the article that is an upstate New York reference, that was between 150 and 200, I think.
Yeah.
But it's all about the scale. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you heard folks, you know, bouncing numbers off you, was it sort of that 15 to 20 range, 100, somewhere in the middle?
You know, I didn't.
Or didn't ever progress to that point.
It never was concrete enough. Like, we didn't have a location, we didn't have a company, we didn't have like any. You know, the specifics weren't even near being in place to have any kind of estimation. It just seemed like, you know, there's a growth in the data mill industry. There's a need for data mills that use, you know, that need cooling, that need a lot of power. Not a lot of natural disaster risk, and a lot of space, and we have that in Maine. So it seemed like there was an opportunity, but I can't say with any degree of certainty that there would be X number of jobs, because there's just so many unknowns.
Sure. And since you haven't been in on any talks, if there happened since, any updates since the bill died from your end? I mean,
no, it's still
we haven't touched on yet.
Continues to be a dream of mine, because it seems like, you know, that all of the factors are in place here in Maine, that there's an opportunity waiting to happen, and we just need the leadership to kind of get the ball rolling. And while it would be nice if the private sector would just come in and make that happen, it just strikes me that there is a role for government to help that occur by at least sending a signal, whether it be through a resolve or some sort of positive statement from a legislature or the governor or whatever, that this is something we want to do in Maine, and that we have in place. You know, we've set up the infrastructure, we've got the mills, we've got the renewable energy, we don't have a high level of natural disaster, we have a workforce. Seems to me we need to market that somehow. But
Well, Matt's got a question he hasn't covered yet.
yeah.
No, I don't think so. Anything that you want to add, John?
No, I think you've done.
Yeah.
Oh, good. The other thing I just want to mention in terms of
please,
jobs
sure.
is that a lot of my legislative time was also as a member of an executive task force on the Streamlined Sales and Use Agreement, and that would essentially, this isn't so much about jobs, but it's about economic fairness and I think opportunities for small business, and that is that currently these large out-of-state online retailers don't have to collect sales tax and therefore have an advantage over brick and mortar stores in the state of Maine. And so it's something I worked for a long time on, traveled around the country, was part of this executive task force, support the Main Street Fairness Act in Washington. If I'm the next United States Senator, I will co-sponsor it, because I think it's really important that in an age of online marketing and sales, that out-of-state players have to collect sales tax and remit it to the state as well as in-state. And I did, like I said, bring a bill to bring Maine closer to that, and it was initially reported out of the Taxation Committee unanimously, and then for some reason, and I know the reason, was killed. But then I thought, interestingly enough, later the governor came around to realizing that, oh, this is actually a good idea. So hopefully that's another idea that started out.
Why do you think it was killed?
Same reasons. It was this very charged atmosphere around the special election, and I had been a very vocal opponent of some of the LePage administration's early statements, and the Speaker of the House, I had come out because publicly not wanting to support him. There had been a tradition in the Maine House to just sort of not have a vote, and I felt strongly that since there was some issues around finances, that I didn't want to be on the record. And so I just think that there was unfortunately some politics that got in the way of some of good policy going forward. But hopefully others will pick up the ball and run with it. I know others have taken up the streamlined sales and use piece, and like I said, even the LePage administration has bought into it to a certain extent. It's something that's really important, and I continue to support. And it's work that I think I laid a good foundation.
Sure, for future potential.
Yeah, it's already been parts of. There's been a few things. Actually, I don't know, but the Appropriations Committee adopted a few, I think, definitions to move in that direction. And like I said, the LePage administration has come out in favor of the Main Street Main Street Fairness Act, which giving states the ability to have online retailers collect tax, because it's not a new tax. It's just that, if you buy something online from an out-of-state retailer, you're supposed to individually write it on your tax return, and nobody does it. And so there's the number associated with how much tax revenue the state of Maine loses as a result of that fluctuates, but it's millions and millions of dollars. I think it's upward to I don't know, I forget exactly, I don't have it in front of me, but it was a range of between $40 and $100 million we lose every year in uncollected sales tax. So this would be a way to just simply have these big organizations collect the sales tax and remit it to the state, like all the small businesses have to do.
Other states done that?
Yeah, I think 24 states have signed into the agreement, and
but it's not in practice yet, is it?
There's this concurrent track. You need the Congress to pass the Main Street Fairness Act.
Yeah, I see.
And then there's this interstate compact, the Streamlined Sales and Use. But it's definitely generating momentum, because all the states are struggling and need tax revenue. So it's an idea whose time has come. I mean, you can't have, a little tiny store expected to collect sales tax and remit it to the state, but not have Amazon. you know, somehow, because then Amazon can sell its stuff cheaper than a little tiny store, and it
We
just.
go to Freeport and buy something in LLB, we're gonna pay a sales tax. If you're in Illinois and order online, you don't pay the sales tax, correct?
Well, LL Bean does collect it, but
LL
that's an
Bean
exemption.
does.
But Amazon,
Amazon.
if you buy a book from Amazon, they won't collect the sales tax from you and send it to Maine.
No.
You'll be expected to keep track of all
Right.
your purchases and
Right.
write it on your own return, which you won't do.
I haven't heard anybody doing it yet, no.
No. Yeah.
So Cynthia, you mentioned, just the last two quick questions. You mentioned your education consolidation area earlier.
Mhm.
You mentioned sales tax right now, and then we obviously had what we talked about in the middle, which is all these internet initiatives that you sponsored. Anything else that comes to mind right now that we should look at in terms of job creation that you've done, that you have record of doing?
Well, in terms of my own personal life, I have a law firm that had, you know, employees, and I started a nonprofit, the Friends of the Maine Woods, which didn't necessarily have full-time employees, but we, you know, provided some jobs to the people who created the website and did all the design work and design, you know, Liberty T-shirts made our T-shirts, and so provided some, you know, that's small, but let's see.
And were those temporary, the Friends of the Maine Woods?
Yeah, so it basically gave work to local people who do, you know, make the banners and did the T-shirts and the website and the logo. Let me think in terms of.
Anything else from I mean, I know you've sponsored a number of bills, but any others that stood out to you? I mean, I think we covered them all. I just want to make sure that we're not.
Yeah, no, I
something.
think those are
Okay.
definitely the highlight. I mean, the broadband thing was really my thing.
Right. And the last thing is just sort of my own curiosity. One sec. You mentioned, you know, you talked with folks at GWI and Fletcher sort of early on in the Broadband Strategy Council, and I noticed in your campaign finance filings with the state that he had given you $200 5 days after the grant was awarded. And I was wondering if he gave you, when he gave you that donation, this was December 23rd, 2009, if he said why when he
Oh, I think it's probably because I don't recall exactly, but he's given me. He's always been a little, you know, he gives me small donations. He contributed to my U.S. Senate race as well as Rick Bennett's. So he's always been somebody who I can count on for a small donation. I don't recall the circumstances then, actually.
Yeah, well, this was money that he gave to your leadership PAC. That he gave. So the grant was awarded to GWI, and then later it went to Maine Fiber, obviously. But it was awarded to GWI on December 19th. And then he gave you the $200 on the 23rd. And I was just wondering if he had a specific, you know, reason when he gave that you remembered.
No, I'm sure it's because I asked him.